Hi, this is Ryan Haack, and you're listening to the Nerd Byword.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome into another episode of the Nerd Byword podcast. We're going to get you in the festive spirit as we sit down with Bric-A-Brac author Ryan Haack. But first, it's not a complete episode without nerd news. Dave, what's on tap for you?
Well, as it turns out, Marvel's Avengers didn't sell as well as expected, according to Square Enix. Now, this is talking obviously about the Avengers video game that was released a few months back. The Square Enix-produced Avengers game isn't doing so well, apparently, at least according to a recent report on Kotaku.com. So apparently, Square Enix held a briefing for investors in early November, during which the company's president, Yosuke Matsuda, said the following, and I quote, "The HD Games subsegment posted an operating loss as initial sales of Marvel's Avengers were lower than we had expected, and unable to completely offset the amortization of the game's development costs. One investor estimated the loss around $67 million. Now, this is the Avengers we're talking about here. It's a prime cinematic release that makes, like $1 billion or something. So how can this game not catch on? What in the world went wrong here? Obviously, I'm only speculating, but I'm starting to wonder if there is a ceiling for the games as service model. When Avengers was initially announced, there was a fair amount of excitement, followed by, significantly less excitement when it was revealed that the game would have a strong online multiplayer focus with additional characters and missions and maps coming along later. I can tell you that, at least from my perspective, that was a pretty big turnoff. A single-player, story-focused Avengers game would have totally been my jam, but I've grown increasingly tired of the time sinks of online-only games. My last major brush with one of those games was Overwatch, which I enjoyed tremendously and sank a lot of time into, but which ultimately made me feel like I was caught in a never-ending cycle of rebalanced characters and pushy loot box purchases. It's not... without a clear end game or goal in sight, it becomes just this cycle, a never-ending cycle that you just have to break free from at some point. So in short, maybe the amount of gamers willing to live, quote-unquote, in these live service games for countless hours is actually more limited than the industry thinks. Considering that those gamers are sinking all of their time into a game as service already, like, Overwatch, for example, or the annual Call of Duty releases, it seems, to me at least, like it will become increasingly difficult to persuade gamers to give these games as service a shot. Now, the thing is that, at the very least, this Avengers game has somewhat of a single-player story campaign, although rather brief. And if they would have maybe flipped the focus and focus more on the single player component and having a longer campaign and then adding the multiplayer as, this nice side bonus, they might have had a better shot at the very least recouping their development costs, which they apparently did not do here. Chris, what are your thoughts?
So, this is really, really interesting story for me because I just purchased this game a couple of days ago, when it was on sale for the Black Friday special. And in my experience, I've been playing it for a couple of days now. I, like you, very rarely, if ever, want to play online multiplayer games. Almost never. And I've been able to do a single player campaign. You can turn on matchmaking or off matchmaking, and I just turn mine off and I just, stay in my bubble and do my own thing. The campaign so far has been quite enjoyable. This will make you happy, Dave. But Kamala Khan is just absolutely just a revelation in this. Now it's a skosh different from what I've experienced her, in as far as comics. She starts out as that happy-go-lucky fangirl, but then she gets some gumption, and it's a really interesting shift in her character. So I'm really really enjoying it. The move set is probably one of the most frustrating adjustments, but once you get used to it, I'm having a blast. But Kamala is by far the best part of this game so far. I also think a couple of things are in play here. Number one, we're in the middle of a pandemic, so I mean, companies and corporations are losing money left and right. You've got AT&T and Warner and Disney and ESPN and all these major corporations that were thought to be infallible, that are experiencing tremendous layoffs. We're in an economic crisis, we're in a public health crisis. So I mean, the ability to go and spend $60 to $80 on a brand new video game is just not reasonable or realistic at this point in time. Also, it's a bit of an awkward release with the next gen consoles coming out in November, and this game came shortly before, so that played into the awkwardness of it all. I would have probably, it was delayed already. I probably would have delayed it and just released it with the next gen consoles. That would have probably been a little bit more, synced up. But just from my personal experience, I'm really enjoying the game, and I did notice that there seemed to be scrambling with the bonus content. I saw Kate Bishop. Hawkeye, it was announced the other day, so I'm excited to see that DLC coming out. But I'm having a great time.
There was quite a bit of backlash initially when even the character designs were unveiled, and a lot of people were like, "Well, this is dollar store Avengers because they didn't, spring for the movie license and being able to use the likeness of the actors from the MCU." Do you think that may have hurt the game in some respects as well?
It was a bit jarring. Even seeing Tony Stark on the screen and not hearing Robert Downey Jr.'s voice, that's a bit of an adjustment. But I've advocated, alternate universes and timelines before. And so I just put myself in that mindset that this is just a different type of story. And I think, as a longtime fan of these characters, and not so much a casual one, if your exposure to the Avengers is strictly through the MCU, you're probably going to be disappointed. But, I've seen different iterations of them before. So it's a bit of an adjustment, see different characters, but I'm enjoying it. Again, like I said.
That's very interesting. Now, Kris, you are bringing some Spidey-related news this week. Why am I not surprised? What is going on in the world of Spider-Man, Kris?
Well, there are rumblings that Alfred Molina is going to return as Dr. Octopus in Spider-Man 3. Much has been made of this upcoming Tom Holland-led flick, and some rumors of a Spider-Verse type of scenario with Jamie Foxx being signed on to return as Electro, from the Amazing Spider-Man film universe. Rumors that Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield would be, returning as well. And the latest, development on that front is that Alfred Molina is in talks to return as Dr. Octopus. So this came from a website called the GWW, which, when you come to speculations like this, you're always, you want to check your sources, and you don't want to, jump to conclusions, but, they've had some previous success with their sources before. So it's something to take into, consideration. In a 2014 interview, Alfred Molina spoke glowingly about his experience, with the film. Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2 and a lot of Spider-Man fans is their favorite. Speaking of that role, he said, quote, that was the most fun I think I've ever had on a movie of that kind, says Molina. Those big sort of features where you spend like 6 months hanging off a wire, It was the first movie of that kind I'd ever been involved in. He continues, I had a wonderful time. I loved it. I mean, I'd go back and do it again in a heartbeat. So that's really exciting, just to think about, his willingness to return and the GWW here I'm reading on this article, they previously were correct about the Skrull appearance in the Far From Home and the surprise drop of the WandaVision trailer. So they've been, 2 for 2 in that regard. So again, this is, taken as a grain of salt and I'll put some more, gumption behind this when I see it, officially confirmed. But it's an exciting thing to think about. And, I'm a bit on the opposite end when it comes to Spider-Man 2 and the Raimi films. We've talked about this briefly before, but Tobey Maguire and Kirsten Dunst, I think were serious miscasts. I think nostalgia can be a powerful drug sometimes, and we think back to that time in our lives, and we remember it, better than what it was. So I'm particularly not a fan of their portrayals in those roles. But Molina was just magical, and he still is, and he's easily the best part of that film for me. Dave, what do you think about all this?
Yeah, actually, I find this incredibly exciting. Alfred Molina's Dr. Octopus may have been the best thing about Spider-Man 2, which, at least at the time, represented probably one of the best superhero movies of all time up to that point. So seeing him reprise the role would be extremely exciting. It seems increasingly clear to me that this next MCU Spider-Man will be in some way a riff off of the idea of the Spider-Verse. I don't think that anybody can deny that that's what it's looking like at this point. The return of Jamie Foxx as Electro, the consistent rumors that former Spidey actors Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield have been in talks to appear. I mean, clearly something is up here. On the one hand, that's exciting. I love alternate universe and alternate timeline stories, and if done well, they rank as some of my favorites oftentimes. It would also, I think, go a long way to unite the fandom of cinematic Spider-Man a little bit, considering the consistent arguing, particularly online, about which Spider-Man was better. Maybe we could even get some closure for Maguire and Garfield's versions of the characters. Both series ended rather cliffhangery, for lack of a better term. But, you know what, here I go again. On the other hand, it continues to disappoint me that we can't have a classic street-level Spider-Man movie from the MCU. To me, Tom Holland is the embodiment of Ultimate Peter Parker, one of my favorite versions of that character, yet for some reason Marvel insists on making everything global or cosmic for Spidey, which is really not his sweet spot. The best Spidey stories, to me at least, are the ones focused on New York, on crime fighting, and on the deeply personal stakes Peter has and what is happening at any given time in the city. So I'm there for this movie. I'm excited about it. I'll be in line at the theater if this whole COVID mess ever goes away. And I'll be very excited to see Alfred Molina as Dr. Octopus again. His performance was a revelation at the time. But I don't know. I feel like there may be a better movie and a less fan servicey take on Spider-Man. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's kind of how I'm feeling at this point.
Yeah, I could definitely, empathize with that. I think the world of Tom Holland, and I would totally agree that that's Ultimate Spider-Man. And the thing that's kind of interesting is thinking back to how they portrayed, Doc Ock's origin story in Spider-Man 2. That kind of feels like the ultimate Doc Ock as well. So that would be an interesting tie-in. But, and I've talked about this before. I was upset at first with the Sony and Marvel split. I was raging, pretty hard, but I also kind of came to this resolution that maybe it's for the best that they would taper back over to, solo Spidey stories, because I'm right there with you. The best Spider-Man stories are street level stuff. That's why if you take out the heavy-handedness of Tony's inclusion in Homecoming, it's one of my favorite Spider-Man films, because it's Peter doing his best and against all the naysayers, and he's taking on the big bad guy, even when he's overmatched. And it's so enjoyable to me. And the same thing for, Far From Home. If you take out the heavy-handedness of the MCU, it's a great Spider-Man story. So that gave me hope going forward to the future. And other than, just having all these fun things to look forward to a potential Spider-Verse movie, I'm also looking forward to a time when we can just have Tom Holland being the centerpiece of the film and not having to have this overarching, masculine role model. It was Tony Stark, and then it was Nick Fury, and then, it's going to be Doctor Strange, it looks like, in this film. So hopefully we could just have Tom doing his thing, because he is magnetic on screen. He's one of the best things, about the movies that he's in, even when, like Infinity War and Endgame. He's so doggone enjoyable in those movies that I want to see him featured.
I totally agree with that assessment. I would just like a Spider-Man movie focused squarely on the Spider-Man we have, street level in New York. Just give us a good, personal, high stakes Peter Parker story. I'd be all over that in a heartbeat.
I will say this, and I don't think that they would misfire on this, because it would be a huge missed opportunity with the popularity of Miles Morales coming out of Into the Spider-Verse, and now his own game on the PlayStation 5. They better have Miles in this movie. If they are doing a Spider-Verse thing, they better have Miles, because it would be a huge misstep if they don't.
Yes, totally. I agree with that.
And they already laid the groundwork with Donald Glover as Uncle Aaron, so it's there. It's begging to happen. All right, that wraps up our nerd news segment. When we come back from our first break, we're going to sit down with author Ryan Haack and talk Christmas time with Bric-A-Brac. Stick around. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We are here with writer Ryan Haack. We're here to talk about Bric-A-Brac issue number 2. Ryan, thanks so much for joining the show today.
Yes, and thank you guys for having me. Thank you so much.
We always like to start an interview with our guest's origin story. Our listeners can probably start to guess our first question of each interview at this point. What was your first exposure to the nerd world, and what set you on the path toward becoming a writer of comic books?
So I think my first exposure to the nerd world was, I think in comic books at least, I was really interested in the Batman animated series. When I was a kid, it aired on, I think, Boomerang or something. So it wasn't like, I was born in the late 90s, so I wasn't there for it, but I definitely saw those. And then my interest in comic books kind of grew until I actually started buying them with, I think the first thing I got was like The Killing Joke, which is, it's kind of a classic at this point. I think someone just recommended it to me. And then I think the comic that really stuck with me was Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale's The Long Halloween. Like, I remember reading that, and that was kind of the thing that really kind of hooked me. And then I didn't really stop from there. And luckily around that time, the New 52 era was happening. So the quality of the books was questionable. I think a lot of people still debate that. But the thing that's not debatable is that it was a good jumping on point for young readers like I was. And so I was kind of jumped on there, and I didn't stop reading comic books ever since.
It's interesting that you mentioned Jeff Loeb by name. We have a complicated relationship with him, especially after Ultimatum.
Yeah, that's a fact.
Yeah. Ultimatum is, at least people look at it for the amazing art,
Yeah, for sure.
So besides, being exposed to Batman the Animated Series and some of Jeff Loeb's writing, who would you say are your biggest influences as a writer yourself now?
So I do a lot of kind of writing. I don't just write comic books. I do prose, I do scripts, I make my own movies. I do a lot of different stuff like that. But I think, in terms of comic books, my main inspiration and the book that really inspired me the most to really want to write them was Batman and Robin by Grant Morrison. I think that book just kind of unlocked this, like, how fun writing could be and how fun telling stories could be, and the collaborative medium could be of comic books. I mean, I'm sure there's a million examples of books that are like that, but Batman and Robin, it was just so fun. And the Frank Quitely, when Frank Quitely started, or Cameron Stewart did the art for a while, and just so many great stories with Damian Wayne and Dick Grayson. And I kind of just fell in love with comic books at that point. And I knew that I loved Grant Morrison's writing because I love all of his stories. I mean, The Filth is a really, really tough book to get through, but it's amazing. And Final Crisis, I know people have a lot of problems with it, but I think it's still amazing. I think there's still a lot of good stuff there. But even his most mundane work is still, he's always trying to try new things. He's always trying to subvert your expectations. I think Grant Morrison is my favorite comic book writer, and he's influenced me the most to take chances.
Yeah, you'll find mad love from my corner of the pod for Grant Morrison's work, particularly on Justice League. His JLA was absolutely ridiculously fantastic.
And I'm a huge Mutant fan, and his new X-Men is one of the best things I've ever read. So major love for Grant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was his Batman for me. I love Batman R.I.P. The concept of having Batman have a backup, like it's totally the Batman thing, but no one's ever really thought of that, having a backup Batman inside of his brain to kind of, if his mind was ever attacked, that he would have this backup personality. Or there's just so many great stories in his Batman run, and I just think again, he's never afraid to kind of try something new that is risky to a lot of people. When he killed Bruce Wayne, supposedly, which he didn't really, people were really outraged, and he's done so many different questionable things, even I think killing Damian Wayne at one point, and I think that was going to be the end of his Batman run, but they brought him back after Grant Morrison left Batman Inc., Batman Incorporated. So it's just, he always does these things that are very, they subvert expectations, but in a good way.
Now, speaking of trying a bunch of different things, you've also scribed an anthology of web comics. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, for sure. I really love short comic books, and I think again that kind of the Grant Morrison influence is kind of there too, because I always try to think about stories that might be really exciting to tell in a comic book format that are 5 pages or 3 pages or 4 pages, and I think that's a sweet spot. And those are some of the hardest comic books to write, but that are really short, but they're also the most gratifying. And so I just since 2018, every week or so I'll try to write a script that's about that long, and then go on ArtStation or something and try to find an artist to collaborate on it. And that's what I've been doing for the past couple of years, and we've accumulated so many stories. We have about 25 stories now. So we're going to be launching a second volume of this anthology series on Kickstarter next year. But it's a really fun thing to do, because a lot of these people on ArtStation, they're just they've never done comic book work, so they kind of on the side are just collaborating with me, or maybe they're veterans in comic books, but they just want to do something for fun. Or the whole idea is just to have a fun collaboration. That's really the whole concept, and just to have fun. With these really short stories. That's the there's not a deadline or anything with them. It's just a blast. And I'd collaborate with anyone. And I think that's one of the fun things too, is there's no pressure. And that's how the anthology kind of came about, is, just asking people, knocking on doors and asking if they would collaborate.
Now, Bric-A-Brac is a really unique concept for a book. Where did all that stem from?
Yes, Bric-A-Brac. Well, I've always been obsessed with Christmas. I think anyone who knows me would know that, because I just really love the imagery, the meaning. Christmas is a time that has a lot of meaning, like layers of meaning. Even if you're not a religious person, you can find meaning in the simple fact that there's more sunlight during Christmas time. We go from a really dark time when there's hardly any sun to a time when there's a lot of sun. So there's, even at the simplest, most base level form, Christmas is still meaningful to people, even people who are atheists. It's still meaningful. And obviously, with you adding religion and being with family, there's layers of meaning. But anyway, I've always thought it was a magical, important time, and I've always wanted to tell a story around that time. And basically, the Rankin Bass movies. So I'm talking about Rudolph, The Year Without a Santa Claus, or Santa Claus is Coming to Town, or the list goes on. There's so many of them that are kind of Christmas themed. Those movies were a huge inspiration for the tone, the imagery, the characters, the kind of universe that I was creating with this book. So I would say those were the main inspiration. And then there's some other peripheral Christmas movies I think are really great too with some of the themes. But that's kind of, I wanted to make a amalgam of all these Christmas universes. Like, what would it look like? We only get to see really the North Pole in all these Christmas movies, but what does the other part of that planet look like? If, it was the idea to kind of fully realize a fantasy Christmas world. And so, and kind of honestly, to throw anything in there. So there's dragons. Obviously, you guys, I think I gave you guys the issue, so you kind of read it. There's dragons. There's, strange, abominable creatures. There's elves and fairies and all these kinds of things. And there's really no explanation as to how they got there. But the idea is just, it's an amalgam of a fantasy world that I've never seen in a Christmas story.
Yeah, so we did get a copy of issue 1, and it was, really an interesting read and something very, very different. But one thing that really stood out to me is, I'm curious, do you have a personal vendetta against Tchaikovsky and or the Nutcracker?
No, I don't have a personal vendetta against him. No, not at all. I love his music, and actually, I was just listening to it just now. I mean, I love the Nutcracker. I think it's amazing. The idea with the Nutcrackers was that you usually see the Nutcrackers as heroes, and again, it's kind of subverting the idea of changing that and being like, well, actually, let's make the Nutcrackers the bad guys. And kind of see what that's like and how that could possibly work. Because I think that, it's just the Nutcracker, they're so visually awesome to look at. They're so cool. And their origin is so cool. And the idea that, I think that they're just such a visually awesome character. It would be they fit a perfect villain. They fit a hero, but it would be kind of more fun to see how they would look like as a villain. So that's kind of how that idea came about. Actually, in the first couple of drafts, they were the heroes, and I just didn't feel right. So no personal vendetta, just I really, really enjoy the imagery of the Nutcracker. I think it's so classically Christmas. It's hard to explain.
Now, there are some deeply symbolic metaphors present in Bric-A-Brac. What central message are you hoping to communicate to your readers with the story?
For sure. A central message is, like I was talking about the layers of meaning, there are so many, even if you take out religious context, but of Christmas, But in this book specifically, the main idea is kind of having a kid, a young kid. So, presumably, maybe you get celebrated Christmas as well. And you kind of, when you're a young kid, you believe in Santa Claus, you believe in all these fantastical things that happen on Christmas Eve night. And then the reality hits, and you kind of are forced to reconcile with the fact that Santa isn't real in the way that you thought he was. I still think Santa's real, but he's actually more real than maybe someone who breaks into your house and gives you, because the idea is really powerful. But it's, obviously when you grow up, he's not real in the way you wanted him to be. And so basically, when that happens, you have to change. Your idea of Christmas kind of alters. I think it's a really important moment when you find out Santa Claus isn't real, quote unquote. And so basically, that's Garrett's journey. It's kind of a metaphor for Garrett's journey. Obviously, on a planet Christmas, Father Christmas is real. That's indisputable. But the difficulty with Garrett is that he's forced to reconcile with the fact that planet Christmas is at war. The planet he thought was all beautiful and sublime, and he was about to go into, because as we established in the first couple of pages, he's about to be 10 years old, and they're going to let him go out and explore the world now. He's old enough to. That's his right, and the fairies will let him. But now he's just found out that this world is totally corrupt now. It's not what he thought it was. And so it's kind of a metaphor there. It's going from the innocent into the, now you're kind of scarred with this idea that all the things you held dear were so important to you. And so, Garrett kind of goes through this world and sees all the different characters, interacts with them. There's a lot of great characters, like a lot of good people with good hearts, but there's also people who he encounters who aren't nice. Not only in the Nutcrackers, but there's people who hate Christmas. There's people who are ultra religious and like good King Wenceslas, who is very strict, and he, imprisons people who celebrate Christmas. And there's all this kinds of stuff who he meets along his journey. And so the idea, to put a long explanation short, is from going from innocence to kind of the reality of things, the reality of how life is. And you have to experience Christmas in that way. That's really the main concept.
So again, we did get a chance to read issue 1, which was crowdfunded last year, and you currently have issue 2 up on IndieGoGo. What can readers look forward to with this next part of the story?
For sure. Well, more characters are coming. So first off, we're going to get a lot more character interaction and explanation with Garrett and Marie. They at the end of the last issue, it kind of ended abruptly where they had a disagreement. Well, this disagreement kind of goes on because Garrett is a pacifist. He still doesn't understand the world. And so Marie is the leader of an army of people who are rebelling against the evil Nutcrackers to save Planet Christmas. And she is trying her best to, kind of find Father Christmas, which is their main purpose, who is actually the greatest warrior on all of Planet Christmas. The only issue is that he's lost his Christmas spirit. And so that's kind of one of the things we'll develop in this issue, and the elves will explain to them what's going on with that. We'll meet Jack Frost, who is a more redemptive character. So he's had some dark dealings with the Nutcrackers and an outside source from another planet who's kind of outsourced weapons to the Nutcrackers so they can take over the planet. So we're going to be developing these sorts of ideas. Jack Frost is definitely a redemptive character. Maybe more in the lights of Scrooge, and so he's kind of like a Scrooge, and he's turned into this big, ugly golem creature. And then we'll meet the narrators, the ghosts of good of past, present, and future, the ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future, who are slightly different than what we've seen in previous incarnations. In fact, they're a lot different, but that's intentional. And so, yeah, issue 2 is really where the characters will be at their lowest. It's a 3-issue series. It's a 3-issue, story. And so this is really the act 2 where the characters will be tested. There's a lot of fights in this one. There's a lot of battles, and the characters will most certainly be tested.
Now, one thing that jumps out, in reading issue 1 and looking at the advanced art of issue 2 is the art is just absolutely stunning. Now, Raphael Sam is working on issue 2. Tell us a little bit about the working relationship between the two of you.
For sure, yeah. So Raphael, he lives in Brazil, right? And so he does not speak English. English is definitely not his first language. So we do have some issues every once in a while, kind of communicating every once in a while with ideas, but it's almost like he always makes it better, which is, there's never, like, I'll try to explain to him one certain thing I want a character to do, but he's so well-versed in his style, and he, I think, honestly in tune with the story that he understands, maybe this character should really be doing this instead of this. And it's just, he adds a dimension to the whole story that I couldn't just as a writer add. He's such a huge part of the story. It's such a huge part. And so our collaboration is really fun, and he's always adding little background things that I only notice now. Like, there's so many things I look back at issue 1 and notice, he added some little Easter egg or some little thing. And it's just a really fun collaboration.
Now, on your IndieGoGo campaign, what are some of the reward tiers that you're offering for this project? What can you tell us about those?
For sure. Well, since it's at number 2, obviously I want to give people the opportunity to, catch up with the story if they hadn't already. So there's you can get the featured perk if you go there now is issue 1 and 2, physical and digital, and a bookmark and a print of Jack Frost that you can only get on this campaign. And so that's the featured perk. I think that's the most popular one. We have a really cool perk this time around where you can donate 4 books to the Boys and Girls Club. So a chapter of your choice, whatever Boys and Girls Club you'd like to, because it is kind of a Christmas, we're going with the Christmas theme. So it would only make sense to kind of pay it forward or, give a child the gift of this book. So maybe they can get interested in it or something. And so that's something that I got the idea from. Some campaigns give books to the military and this sort of thing. And I kind of thought, well, what if we did it this way? And then there's another really cool perk that's kind of a fan favorite at this point, where you can create a Christmas character, which you can kind of, there's a lot of opportunity to create more characters in the background, given that this is a book about a war on a Christmas planet with basically an unlimited amount of fantasy characters. So that is why there is basically this tier. People can kind of make whatever character they'd like to have in the back of the book. There's a limited amount of slots, but you can do that. And you can also get a sketch from Raphael with one of the characters on it. So yeah, just a lot of fun perks, very simple perks, given that, a lot of people go crazy with variant covers or this or that. But I think that, I think people really like how they can participate in the story with the Create a Christmas Character tier. I think that's a really unique thing.
That's fantastic. Now, we featured several creators with work that's going on crowdfunding sites and who or do self-publishing, and there seems to be a real massive shift towards those venues with self-publishing and crowdfunding. What's your take on that? Then so many creators, no matter what their level of acclaim, whether it's someone who's worked in the industry or newcomers to writing and art, are utilizing this.
Yeah, well, it is it's a great deal, like, especially for me, it's firstly, if you're starting out doing crowdfunding, it's not easy. I mean, if you're, like you said, some established professionals from DC or Marvel have come over and done their own books, and they're probably going to succeed. It's very likely they won't have a problem succeeding. But the issue does, it's very difficult for someone to go into IndieGoGo or a Kickstarter and try to do their own campaign without having an email list or a lot of established, a lot of work established, or, if no one knows who you are, it's just really difficult to start. So there's that. But I think that there's the reason why is that you can have a direct contact with your customer. There's no wall between you and the fans, which that can be a good thing and a bad thing. But I think that that's one thing that people are really craving, is that direct, the direct response from a fan. And I know you can get it on Twitter and stuff like that, but I think when you have no editorial, you have no one telling you really how to tell the story, I think that's very attractive to people. I think that's why the shift, even from professionals into independent comics and crowdfunding, has been so popular this year, especially. I mean, we had Scott Snyder, Jimmy Palmiotti has been a big advocate. Sean Gordon Murphy, obviously, with his big campaign. I'm trying to think of others. There's so many others. Carl Kiesel, of course, has been doing it for several years now. So, I mean, it's just, it's going to keep happening, and I think it's great because it does give people more freedom to kind of, make a book and then maybe have it published in Image, or I'm not really sure, but I think that's why there's the attraction.
Do you feel like maybe some of the bigger names that have decided to do this crowdfunding thing are maybe stealing a little bit of the independent creators' thunder, or is it more of a the more the merrier kind of situation?
That's tough. I think that it's kind of just, I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, I want them to succeed, and it's not, but I do think that it is difficult for maybe someone who's, a smaller creator, when you're kind of trying to go up against Tony S. Daniel. It's like, wow, okay, well, it's kind of tough, it would be tough. But at the same time, I think that, Kickstarter and IndieGoGo, they have figured out ways to highlight projects that are smaller. And I think that's the way the websites are built. I really do. Because obviously on IndieGoGo, you can have a really huge creator put on something, but then somehow a book that just has a $5,000 goal that only made $1,000 in a day is over the book that made maybe $10,000 in a day, only because of certain statistics and certain things about, maybe the goal. And I think it is fair. I think there's a lot of, the websites have, I think, really worked on that, trying to make it fair for everyone, with taking their goal into account. So if my goal was 5,000 and let's say a professional publisher's goal was, something, I think that they would kind of take into account, oh, this is a professional, this is a rookie, so we're going to try to highlight the rookie in some ways. And there's so many ways that these platforms do that. Kickstarter has projects we love, or they have certain labels they can put on projects to kind of give them a push, and IndieGoGo can put you on the top of a chart or something. So I'm not really worried about that exactly. I mean, it could be worrisome if more and more keep coming on, but I just don't see that happening quite yet.
So much has been said about the proper timeline for winter holiday celebrations. When's the appropriate time to commence festivities in your mind?
I think any time is the appropriate, because again, Christmas, as we said, is a very meaningful time, and the more you can really get in tune with how you are at Christmas time, probably the better person you'll be. So I think that if you try to get in the Christmas mindset all year round, and that doesn't mean listening to Christmas music all the time or putting up decorations, it just means like getting into that, like, wow, it's Christmas, I am going to be happy. And I know that it's not a happy time for a lot of people. I know it's very difficult, but if you do feel the Christmas spirit, you should embrace that and try to do it all year round. But as in terms of when you should listen to Christmas music and stuff, I think, honestly, yeah, November 1st is fine. I mean, after Thanksgiving that's when you can, my theory is that you can listen to instrumental Christmas music on November 1st until Thanksgiving. And then on Thanksgiving, you can actually listen to it with words. So that's kind of my theory, is that that's more acceptable to people nowadays. I don't know.
Now, besides Bric-A-Brac issue 2 right now in IndieGoGo, are there any other future projects that you can tease or talk about? Some that you can kind of throw out there for the audience to keep an eye out for?
For sure, yeah. Well, like I said, my anthology is going to definitely be on IndieGoGo, or Kickstarter, I think, actually. I'll do it on Kickstarter, because that's where the other one succeeded. So we'll be launching that on Kickstarter in, March or April. We'll have about 15 to 20 stories with that one. And that's really the only other project I'm planning to go after in 2021, other than finishing Bric-A-Brac, because obviously it's a 3-issue story. I want to have it kind of done. Hopefully, I'll actually have it done before we even launch the campaign, so I can just print it and ship it. And the goal will be less if the production is, I have to pay for less production. So that's really what I'm going to be working on next year, is finishing this story, hopefully getting issue 3 out in October, and then maybe having a campaign on Kickstarter for an exclusive, like, leather bound or a paperback collection of all the stories. You never know. So, yeah, that's kind of the idea. Nothing crazy new next year, not a huge like IP or something, but a lot of different kind of continuing my comic book stories.
So where can our listeners go to support you and your work?
Yes. So right now, IndieGoGo with Bric-A-Brac number 2 is huge, and we do end on December 10th. So if you're thinking about maybe you will get the PDF of the first issue and a PDF of what we have so far done of Bric-A-Brac number 2, which is the entire backstory. We have a backup story you'll get to read, and 5 or 10 pages of interior stories. So that's like, you'll get all that before Christmas Eve, so you can read that to your kids. But that's where you can find me now in terms of what I'm doing right now. But you can look at me up at Instagram at Ryan Haack _98. I have a link tree up where I have my podcast. I have the Unspeakable Text website, my webcomic website, and my short films and all that kind of stuff. And on Twitter, I don't use as much, but at Haack _pro. So yeah, that's where really you can find me and find all my work. I always try to post at least once a day.
All right, the book is Bric-A-Brac. You can find it on IndieGoGo. Ryan Haack, thank you so much for joining us today, and best wishes.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me, and Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Thanks so much. All right, that wraps up our interview with author Ryan Haack of Bric-A-Brac. Be sure to head to IndieGoGo and check out that project and support him if you can. When we return from this, our final break, we're going to come at you with 2 more Nerd Commendations. All right, we are here for our final segment, Nerd Commendations. Dave, you have a magnificent suggestion for us. What's going on?
Yeah, I've spoken before about how quickly I've become a huge fan of the Ms. Marvel character Kamala Khan. I've devoured the entire run by writer G. Willow Wilson, then switched to the most recent series, Magnificent Miss Marvel by Saladin Ahmed and Min-Kyu Young. And I'm going to admit, I had some concerns initially switching, creative teams. G. Willow Wilson was involved in the creation of Kamala Khan, and so seeing another writer handle her worried me initially. My concerns were for naught. Saladin Ahmed knocked it out of the park, kept Miss Marvel's sprawling supporting cast involved, nailed Kamala Khan's voice, and did a really nice job telling new stories with the character. And I really adore Min-Kyu Young's art here, which is energetic and fun and bright. It's been a blast of a book. I actually managed to get caught up on this series and decided to add it permanently to my pull list. I was so excited, Chris. There's a Marvel series that I'm actually up to date on, and then I got the news that as of January, Magnificent Miss Marvel is over as of issue number 18. The issue is technically the 75th issue of Kamala Khan's solo adventures, so it is going out with an extra-sized bang. But I have to say, it breaks my heart that the series is ending. Now, I do know Marvel has a history of like running a series for 12 to 18 months, canceling it, and then bringing it back in a new volume. They're actually, I think, a little more intense with the constant canceling and new number ones than even DC is. So I have hopes that the series will be coming back at some point. But, again, what creative team will be on there and how they manage to capture this character that I've really... I just love this character. She's brought me a lot of joy so far. So given the joy the series has brought me, I want Marvel to relaunch this character into a new series sooner rather than later. So my nerd commendation is, well, basically just all 75 issues of Kamala Khan solo adventures. But if the most recent stuff is what you can get a hold of, Magnificent Ms. Marvel is, in fact, magnificent. It's an absolute blast of a series.
Yeah, so I said this in our new segment with playing Marvel's The Avengers on the Xbox. I freaking love this character. Like, she is so wonderful. She is a breath of fresh air. Here's a mild spoiler, but even in the trailer for the video game, she is exposed to the Terrigen, on A-Day when this Terrigen explodes or whatever. And then 5 years later, she basically just like single-handedly brings the Avengers back together and basically is like, get your stuff together. You're the Avengers. And it's so inspirational, like, to see this little girl who grew up idolizing these people, but then can still flip that switch and be like, hold them accountable. And I'm getting, even some Kitty Pryde vibes, and that's the highest compliment that I can give to a character. So I'm really just fascinated to just consume more of content with her. So I'm looking at doing this entire 75 issue run after playing this game for just a couple of days, and even picking up Champions with that features her and another character that's near and dear to my heart, Miles Morales. So I'm just so excited about this character. And I really hope that they do. And I think it would be incredibly stupid if they didn't, being as they have the Ms. Marvel series coming on Disney Plus. Why in the world would you not have a comic, running current? So that's coming in the next year or two. So I and you're absolutely right. Marvel loves doing that new number one business. I mean, laughs in Amazing Spider-Man. How many volumes of Amazing Spider-Man do we have? So I'm just super excited to read all this stuff, and I think my holiday break is going to be very, very comic heavy.
Yeah, so I have also started reading, all these other series that she's popped up in to kind of follow the character around. And I would highly recommend that before you jump into Champions, that you read, I think it's 11 or 12 issues of all different Avengers first. She actually featured as an Avenger with, Lady Thor, for lack of a better term, and Miles Morales for a very short run. And that leads directly into Champions, and it's actually written by the same writer, Mark Waid. So if you do that run of Avengers first, I think that sets up kind of the dynamic of that she has with some of the older heroes and why she ends up leaving the Avengers and kind of starting or helping start this Champions team. So I would highly recommend that if you want more Miss Marvel besides that 75 issues, that you start with all different Avengers before you go to Champions. That I'm in the middle of reading Champions right now, and I'm having a pretty good time with it. So
No, I think I've read a couple of those. Is the Sam Wilson Captain America and Peter Parker a part of that team?
Peter Parker is not. It is. It's Iron Man, Sam Wilson, Captain America, Lady Thor, Miles Morales, Miss Marvel, and the Teenage Nova.
Okay. Oh, the Sam Alexander. Okay, yeah, okay. There was one iteration where I saw that Peter Parker. It was the Parker Industries Peter Parker, where he had that like neon outline. I read a couple of issues of that where they were fighting Kang, but maybe this is a different one. But again, there's more volumes that Marvel wants to throw at you.
Absolutely, yeah. But this one, very short. I think it was only like 12 issues or something, but it was written by Mark Waid, and that led directly into Champions. All right, Chris, what is your nerd commendation this week?
So, Dave, you kind of spawned this idea for me when you recommended 52. When you said it's not necessarily like a secret one, but for if you're getting ready to start reading DC content, check this one out. So I'm doing the same thing. If you're interested in starting to read X-Men books or stories about mutants. The big mutant fans like myself know all about Age of Apocalypse, but if you're just starting out, Age of Apocalypse, man, I can't recommend it highly enough. It's a 1995 comic book crossover storyline. It's mostly published in the X-Men franchise of books by Marvel. So basically, the synopsis is Legion. If you've seen the FX show, David Haller, Legion is the son of Charles Xavier. He suffers some serious mental health issues. He has, like 23 or more personalities. And he looks at Magneto and sees all of the crimes that he's committed. And he thinks that mutant kind and humanity will be better off if he goes back in time and kills Magneto. Unfortunately, Charles Xavier, his father, steps in front of the blast and is killed himself. So this is an alternate timeline where Charles Xavier was killed. And Apocalypse takes over. So the Age of Apocalypse is born, and it's just this amazing alternate reality. That's something that we both, claim as something that we adore. And this is probably the best alternate universe storyline that I've ever read. It just takes like the essence of the characters and doesn't lose the character, essence, and just spins it in a different way. It's very, very interesting. And then they have, several different titles spinning off of this that are just so much fun to read. It starts with X-Men Alpha. It starts the whole thing. You can read up the Legion quest in the Uncanny X-Men books if you like, and the X-Men, the adjectiveless X-Men. But it doesn't really. The thing that I like about this too is it doesn't require a whole lot of continuity because it's an alternate reality. You don't have to be overwhelmed by like what happened for this, and as troublesome as X-Men continuity is, you could pretty much just read this event by itself. Starts with X-Men Alpha. And then it breaks off into some different, storylines. You've got Gambit and the Externals. Gambit's got his own team. So they really, really went into the 90s and the popular characters from the X-Men in the 90s, and they got their own books. Gambit has his own team, Gambit and the Externals. Generation Next, which is some of the most glorious Chris Bachalo art that you'll ever see on an X book. Chris Bachalo on an X book is just a symphony of art, and it's glorious in its weirdness. You have Astonishing X-Men, who are led by Rogue. Sabretooth is on that team. Blink, Wild Child, Morph, Sunfire. Who probably Sunfire has my favorite costume in Age of Apocalypse. Such a cool redesign of that character costume. Amazing X-Men is Quicksilver, Storm, Dazzler, Banshee, Iceman, and Exodus. Then you have Weapon X, which is Logan, but he only has one hand, and his lover, Jean Grey. So that kind of takes its spins on its head that Jean is with Logan now. Factor X, X-Man, Nate Gray, who's such a fantastic character. And then my personal favorite, I could recommend this just on its own, Excalibur, but it's spelled Xcalibre. It's a team built around Nightcrawler, and his mom Mystique, and it's so cool. Like, it's basically like a swashbuckling pirate adventure with my personal favorite mutant, Nightcrawler, and his mom, Mystique, and they're on the same side for once, and it's really, really cool. But again, this is just really, really fun, and it's of all the 90s era comics that I've read, this is without a doubt my favorite. It just it knows what it is. It leads into it. As far as the creative team, you've got several different writers, including Scott Lobdell, Mark Waid, Fabian Nicieza, John Francis Moore, Larry Hama, Warren Ellis, Jeff Loeb. Yes, Jeff Loeb appearance again. But before he disgusted us with Ultimatum, Howard Mackey and Terry Cavanaugh. As far as art team, you've got Roger Cruz, Steve Epting, Joe Mad. I love Joe Mad's art. So great. Andy Kubert is so amazing. Tony Daniel, Salvador LaRocca, who I love. Chris Bachalo, I can't say much. I love his art. Adam Kubert and so many others. Terry Dodson's in there. Carlos Pacheco's great. For the art alone, not to mention the really fun storylines, Age of Apocalypse is the way to go. You've got a fantastic reading list that Marvel Unlimited has displayed on their app. You just go in there and you just look up Age of Apocalypse, and it tells you issue by issue by issue by issue to read. It's super easy. You just pin that to your homepage on Marvel Unlimited. And then also Comic Book Herald has a great reading order if you want to do some background stuff, if you really got the extra time. But Age of Apocalypse is probably the most fun that I've ever had reading a comic book.
Yeah, so I've obviously never read this event. Although I'm familiar with the basic trappings, I've heard of it several times. Legion accidentally killing Charles Xavier, this whole apocalypse thing happening 10 years sooner, alternate timeline, got all that. And as I've mentioned earlier in the episode, I'm a sucker for alternate reality stories. Although I usually need a really strong foundation in the regular reality of the characters before I feel like I can really enjoy the alternate takes. I'm still working on that for X-Men, I think. So would you say the story is truly new reader friendly? And if not, what would be some required reading that you would say fans should get into before they try to read Age of Apocalypse?
I would think it's pretty, if it's pretty easy to pick up new. If you get the basic grasp of those characters, even like looking up like a quick bio on Wikipedia or, like the Marvel wiki pages, it's pretty easy. If you saw enough of the X-Men animated series from the 90s, that kind of leads right into it, from like the teams that you get into. Also, the one thing I forgot, and I don't know how I forgot this, the X-Men are led by Magneto in this alternate reality, and as my absolute favorite character in comics, say no more. I've got Magneto leading the X-Men, so like it's, but I always want to recommend the Claremont run when it comes to X-Men. So if you were probably going in order and you wanted to have some background knowledge, I would guess read Claremont. I'm never going to say anything other than read Claremont's X-Men, but even the launch of the new volume, the 91-92 adjectiveless X-Men title, that might even be some good prior knowledge, just kind of get a grasp of the basic characters that you're going to be introduced to.
All right, well, that sounds like a good starting point then for me if I'm going to read this.
All right, that wraps up another episode of the Nerd Byword podcast. We thank you for joining in. We thank writer Ryan Haack for joining us for today's interview. And as always, you can find us on social media on Instagram and Twitter at Nerd Byword, Facebook at The Nerd Byword, and individually on Instagram and Twitter at That Nerd Dave and at That Nerd Chris.
And be sure to give us a 5-star rating and review on the podcasting platform of your choice. We're available on pretty much any platform you can imagine. We're on, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio. We are on Audible now as well. So if you're looking anywhere for the Nerd Byword, please make sure to give us a rating and review. We totally would appreciate it.
And if all that's overwhelming, just go to nerdbyword.com and you can listen to it there as well. As always, thanks so much. Stay well and stay nerdy.
The Nerd Byword is written and produced by Kris and Dave, two nerds with a love of all things pop culture. The podcast features music by Al Jimenez and show art by Ashery Design. Find us at nerdbyword.com and wherever podcasts are available.